Hello, my name is Shmuel Bowman, and I'm overjoyed to talk to you today about the festival of Sukkot. Now, we can open up the Bible and we can look at Sefer Vayikra, which is the book of Leviticus, and we can look at chapter 23, verse 34, through chapter 23, verse 44. And in those 10 verses describes the mitzvah or the commandment of Sukkot and some of the details of what we do. And it's fascinating to read it. But what I find very, very exciting is how we enact it. How do we actually do Sukkot? Because it's written in the Torah. And if somebody was just looking at the Torah and kind of reading about interesting ancient customs or practices, yeah, they would find this very interesting. But it's not an ancient custom or practice. It's a day-to-day thing that we do for that week during the festival of Sukkot. And we do it year after year after year. It's amazing. So what is it? Well, Sukkot is a week-long Jewish holiday festival that begins 5 days after Yom Kippur. That comes out on the 15th of Tishrei. Tishrei being the Hebrew month of Tishrei, middle of the month. And there are two components of Sukkot. One is to celebrate the gathering of the harvest, the end of the harvest in the land of Israel. And the other thing is commemorating the protection of God for the nation of Israel when we left Egypt, and that miracle, that daily miracle of safety, of God's protection while we were in the wilderness for 40 years. Isn't that amazing? So how do we actually celebrate and commemorate this holiday of Sukkot? Well, one, we dwell in a booth or in a structure or a hut or whatever you want to call it. And the walls of that booth or that hut can actually be made of any material that you want. It can be made out of wood. They can be made out of plastic, stone, anything that you want. But get a load of this. The roof, which you would think should be the strongest, most permanent material, nope. That's got to be made of cut organic material, like foliage, leaves, branches, have been cut from the tree. I'm from Toronto, Canada, and growing up, we used to actually have a friend of the family's. I think he was a client of my dad, who was a retired lawyer, and he was a farmer. And right around that time of year, kind of like September, October, was when they were cutting the corn stalks, these long, right, corn stalks. And so we would get them piled up at our driveway every year. And it was my job and my brother to get them on top of this booth. So that's one thing that we're doing. We're dwelling in a booth, okay, during that period of time. We're having all our meals there, okay, deep discussions, Torah learning. It's all happening in this booth, which is called a sukkah. And we actually sleep in the sukkah as well during the festival of Sukkot. Not everybody does that. In some climates, it's a little complicated to do that, a little tricky to do that, and impractical. Again, coming from Canada, and if the 15th of Tishrei showed up later in the Gregorian calendar, so there were times when it could be like end of October, and we get snow. So what you would do is you'd go out, you do kiddush, right? The blessing over the wine or grape juice. And before you freeze to death, you come back in the house. But in Israel, wow, the weather is perfect. It's like really, really perfect. Starting to get a little bit cool, but just perfect for eating in and having your meals and hanging out in there. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we're doing is that we're holding, waving, taking what's called the four kinds. In Hebrew, arba haminim. And these are four specific types of vegetation. So what specifically are they? Well, etrog, which is from the citrus family. It looks like a lemon, but way, way, way more valuable. The second thing is lulav. And a lulav is this palm frond. Kind of like, looks like the spine, right? And then you have 3 hadassim. And these are myrtle twigs with their leaves on them. And finally, 2 aravot. These are willow twigs with the leaves on them as well. And you take them and you grab them and you hold them together. And you hold them and you can wave them. And you can just really connect with the fact that there's this mitzvah, there's this commandment written in the Torah by God to do this. And Baruch Hashem, thank God we have the ability to do this every single year. So what else was happening during Sukkot? Well, in the days of the Beit HaMikdash, in the days of the temple, so during this time we're offering korbanot, we're offering sacrifices of different animals, but the most valuable animal, and think about it this way, the most valuable possession that you have, right? So in the times of the temple, very, very agrarian society, the bull is going to be the most valuable of your possessions. And over the course of the week of Sukkot, 70 bulls were sacrificed. And this corresponds to the 70 nations of the world. And I didn't actually count to see if there were 70 nations of the world, but there is an idea in the Torah, we see this time and time again, whenever we use the number 70, it means like everything. It means everybody, okay? And so the 70 nations of the world is all the nations of the world. Isn't that amazing? That in the Jewish temple, you actually have sacrifices by Jews, right? On behalf of the nations, of all the nations of the world. So it really drives home the idea, right? Ki beiti beiti Hashem l'kol ha'amim. For my house, God says, shall be the house of prayer for all nations. It's very, very interesting that when we go back to the source of Sukkot, again, like I said at the beginning, Sefer Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, verse 34. Check it out for yourselves. At the very end, in verse 44, it talks about God saying, okay, you're going to dwell in these huts because when you were in the wilderness for 70 years, I sheltered you, right, in these huts. And it's very interesting because a couple questions come up. Why specifically do we commemorate this time of year? After all, didn't we live in huts throughout the entire year? And the second thing is, so what exactly are these huts all about? And, you know, why do we need to commemorate kind of like the tent or the Winnebago or the hotel room that we slept in? I mean, what's that all about? So let's go back for a moment and remember that the roof itself, the structure itself, is very, very temporary. Organic material. That's not the kind of thing you want to build your permanent home with. If you think about it, the most solid part of your home should be your roof. I mean, that's the part that's going to receive the most stress, either from the hot sun or from rain, or again, if you live in a cold climate, the snow or ice. That's going to be the most vulnerable part of the house. So why are we building that out of organic material, out of foliage? And perhaps this is where it comes into play. The fact is that it's just a few days after Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is this idea of coming before God, right? And saying, okay, this is where I'm coming to you, dear God, to ask for forgiveness. I know I've done wrong throughout the year, but it's time to do tshuva. It's time to return to the person I'm supposed to be. And I hope you'll forgive me, and I hope I have another chance in the coming year. So can you imagine, after that intense day, 5 days later, we come out and we live inside a structure with a very, very temporary roof. You know, that's a statement that really drives home the idea that, God, I just have all my faith in you. And I'm going to just take this temporary short period of time and just demonstrate that I don't need a strong roof, because I know that you're going to protect me. You're going to shelter me. Just like you let me, in a sense, have another chance for another year to make it right. So it's very, very interesting that Rashi, who was a great rabbinical commentator back in the 12th century in France and in Germany, so he says something very, very interesting. And by the way, I happen to be a relative, right, of Rashi, which is really cool. And Rashi is basically saying something very, very important. He says, yeah, God says, be in booths during this period of time because I've sheltered you in booths in the wilderness. Rashi says, don't think of it as booths, but think of it rather as sheltered by clouds of glory. Wow. Sheltered by clouds of glory makes all the sense in the world now. God is basically saying that you lived in the harsh wilderness. This is a place filled with scorpions and snakes. This is a really, really tough place to be. I can tell you firsthand that our son, Gavriel, so he just joined the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces. We're so proud of him. And he's in the tank corps. And the tank corps is down there in the wilderness. It's right down there in the southern part of the Negev, okay, in that type of climate, in the area where the nation of Israel spent some of their 40 years. And he tells me that in the morning, when you're out there, you have to shake out your boots in the morning before you put your boots on to make sure that a scorpion hasn't crawled in there. So it's harsh, harsh, harsh climate. So can you imagine God is saying, hey, don't worry about it. Clouds of glory. I'm going to protect you during this entire time that you're in the desert. And so Sukkot then becomes this time to commemorate. I can leave the safety of my permanent home, of my strong walls, of that strong roof over my head. And I can leave that for a week and just live in a flimsy, temporary structure made with leaves as a roof to demonstrate and to remember that for also a temporary period of time, for 40 years, we just lived with clouds of glory, that God's protection was around us. What a very meaningful and powerful idea. So that when we celebrate Sukkot, we're celebrating not only our faith in God, but the exercise of showing our faith in God every year, year in and year out, as we've been doing now for thousands of years.
We at the ICEJ are really excited to help the Jewish people come back to their homeland. But we also want to help them have an easy landing and to get a good start. Today, we're in the city of Ma'ale Adumim, and we're here for a very special project. We'll be visiting new immigrant families who could use some help with some painting and cleaning, and we also want to help provide them with some basic household items.
שמי הילה חממי, עובדת סוציאלית במעלה אדומים. אני מנהלת את מרכז עוצמה, שזה מרכז שבעצם עובד עם האוכלוסיות המוחלשות בעיר, ומנסים כמה שיותר לרשת משפחות כדי להוציא אותם מהמעגל שהם נמצאים בו, משברים תעסוקתיים וכלכליים בעיקר. יש לנו היום יום ככה מאוד מבורך, כי בעצם אני יוצא לפועל פרויקט נהדר, שביום שסם פיליפ התקשר למנכ"ל העירייה ואמר, אנחנו רוצים לחבור ולקבל בעצם מהשגרירות הנוצרית תרומה נכבדה עבור יוצאי העדה האתיופית, אנחנו אמרנו, בבקשה, אנחנו נשמח. ברגע שהתחלנו בעצם להעמיק בצרכים, להיכנס לכל בית, לחקור יותר לעומק, ראינו שמעבר לתנור ולמיטה, יש גם כן עוד צרכים, כמו למשל סיוד הבית, הדברה של הבית, ניקיון של הבית, שמצריך איזושהי התארגנות קהילתית, כדי לבוא ולהגיד, אנחנו יכולים כקהילה למנף את הבית הזה, לעשות שמה איזשהו משהו ככה עוטף ומספק את הכל בבת אחת.
הילה פנתה אליי ככה ואמרה לי שיש את הפרויקט המופלא הזה, ויש לנו פה שני בתים שהיו צריכים איזה ככה עבודה מאוד מאוד רצינית של צביעה וסיוד, ואמרתי לה, מתאים, הכי מתאים למתנדבים. פנינו לבית ספר שיש לו תלמידים שרק מחכים לעשות, גייסנו אותם לטובת הסיפור, והילדים באמת ככה הגיעו, באו וצבעו והרימו את הבית, כאילו פשוט הרימו את הבית.
קוראים לי מיזן מלקמו, תושבת של מעלה אדומים, מאז 3 שנים. אני נורא שמחתי שהתקשרה אליי הילה לעבודות סוציאלית שלי. באו, ראו ואמרו לי מה את צריכה. ומהתחלה התביישתי, אבל היא נכנסה ואמרה לי זה הכל בסדר. זה מאוד עוזר. כשסיפרתי לבנות שלי, נורא שמחו. איזה יופי יהיה לנו מתחת חדשות. כן, תודה לתורמים שחושבים על אנשים שבאמת שצריכים ונזקקים לעזרה שיד תומכת. ותודה לאנשים שמארגנים את זה.
אז זה באמת שמחתנו, ובאמת חושבים עלייך ועל האנשים פה במעלה אדומים, ותבורכו.
תודה רבה.
מנוצרים סביב העולם.
תודה רבה לכם. תודה.
אני רוצה להגיד לתורמים תודה רבה, שבזכותם הצלחנו באמת לעשות שינוי הרבה יותר עמוק, הרבה יותר משמעותי, הרבה יותר ארוך טווח, ולהיעזר באנשים שלנו בתוך זה, זה דבר שבעיניי לא יכולנו לעשות את זה בלעדיהם, אז באמת תודה. פשוט, מתוך הלב.
אז ברגע שאני יודעת שיש לי צורך ויש לי כתובת, כמו השגרירות הנוצרית, שאני יכולה לבוא אליה ולהגיד לה, נתקלתי בבעיה, יש לי איזשהו מצב אקוטי, שאני חייבת להרים משפחה, להרים קהילה, יש לי כתובת, יש לי את השגרירות הנוצרית כדי לבוא ולהגיד לה, עזרו לי, תסייעו ומעלה אדומים על הפרק.
We hope you've been able to see how your giving has made an impact in their lives. Today, thousands of Ethiopian immigrants are ready and longing to come home to Israel, and we stand here ready to help them on their way and to help them settle in. We want to invite you to be a part of this exciting adventure. If you want to join with us, go to icej.org/aliyah.